My name is Seigen Riohan Verna Ellen Johnson. Names are important in the African American community for a variety of reasons, not least of which that many of us are descended from people who survived chattel slavery. People whose names were stolen from them in order to separate them from their humanity and then use their bodies in service of a system in which they were never intended to participate. Seigen Riohan, which means sacred source, true flourishing, is the name I received during my priest ordination. The other names are names that my parents chose to honor women that were important in their lives. I'm here today to tell you about how my life as an ordained Buddhist priest is an expression of wholeness to which each of these names bear witness. They bear witness to wisdom from the African American community and the American Buddhist spiritual community. When I reflect on this, I realize that I didn't become whole so much as I reclaimed being whole. Reclaiming wholeness means trusting in the authenticity of my membership in both of these communities. Now, practicing Buddhists are rare in the Black community, just as Black practitioners are rare in most Buddhist communities. I wouldn't say that there's direct conflict or tension or animosity between the two. For me, it's more like being at dinner with my biological family and my in-laws. I feel connected to both of them, but they don't necessarily feel connected to each other. Still, the population of Black Buddhists is growing in the United States, yet we often feel like we have to explain what it means to be Black and Buddhist. There's even a book titled Black and Buddhist that speaks to this very concern. But obviously, there isn't just one way to be Black and Buddhist. Still, it does seem perplexing to some. For example, there are many in the African American community who find it difficult to understand that we are nourished spiritually by anything other than the Christian church. And there are people in the predominantly white Buddhist community who find it difficult to understand our commitment to anti-racism, social justice, and the cookout. The cookout reference is for the Black folks in the audience and those of you who are fans of the Root online magazine. I don't experience any cognitive dissonance at the intersection of these communities. I'm reminded of words Howard Thurman spoke during a commencement address that he gave at Spelman College in 1980, when he encouraged the graduating young women to hear and listen for the sound of the genuine. He said, "There is in every person that which waits, 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 and listens for the sound of the genuine in herself. There is in every person that which waits, waits, and listens for the sound of the genuine in other people." When I listen to the sound of my genuine, I feel connected to stories of tragedy and triumph that make me whole. Now, it may seem antithetical to include tragedy as a part of wholeness. And the best way that I can explain it to you is through a defining moment in my life when I felt like both my Buddhist and African American identities were in conflict. And that's in the aftermath of events in Ferguson, Missouri, when Michael Brown, a young, unarmed Black man, was shot and killed by a white local police officer. In the days and months following that shooting, Ferguson was beset with a lot of difficult protests and a military-like police presence. I felt like I had to reconcile the pain that I felt as a member of the Black community and also as someone who was living in a residential Buddhist community that was predominantly white and dealing with its own struggles over racism. I know the vulnerability of overt racism. I have experienced walking on the street and being yelled at by white passersby to go back to Africa. I have been randomly punched in the face by a white man while I was minding my own business walking into a pharmacy. These are traumatizing, yet very commonplace experiences that I share with every Black person in America. So I deeply understood and empathized with the sense of urgency that was rising and bubbling up in Ferguson in late 2014. But I was preparing to go to 12 months of residential monastic practice in the Ventana Wilderness in California. It felt important to me to go deeper into my own spiritual practice. Buddhism is the thing that helps me cultivate the capacity to bear witness to this kind of pain and suffering. I also wanted to be connected to a community of healers who are committed to compassion and loving kindness. I didn't feel like I was turning my back on the movement that declared Black Lives Matter. And at the same time, it was difficult for members of my friends and family to understand that sitting meditation could help us respond to the difficulties of this kind of social and immediate injustice. Among the most prominent images of civil rights protest are the March on Washington and the march across the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, Alabama. So people in my life, understandably, found it a little difficult to think that going to sit in a remote location and spend your time in meditation was using the best tool in the toolbox. At the same time, my Buddhist, predominantly white community seemed to lack any sense of urgency around the events that were happening in Ferguson. Many of the white residents were afraid to express support for the Black community in Ferguson because they didn't want to appear biased against the white law enforcement community. And even more disconcerting was when white residents would invoke the words of Martin Luther King Jr., tragically misinterpreting his emphasis on nonviolence as a justification for their inaction. When a group of Buddhists who were in exile in India flew into Ferguson, Missouri, I breathed a heavy sigh of relief. Because in truth, every one of us navigates the boundaries of multiple communities in one way or another. So it turns out that the pain that I felt was probably because I was having some difficulty accessing the African American cultural pieces of myself when I was in the Buddhist community, and I was having difficulty accessing the Buddhist pieces of myself when I wasn't in Buddhist company. The monks in Ferguson remind me that I didn't have to choose between the two, and something inside of me already knew that. As difficult as it might seem for other people to understand, both of these communities are important for how I live my life. Living in this authentic place is sometimes painful, but it is from this authentic place that I access the wisdom that helps me heal. Howard Thurman also said, "Don't ask yourself what the world needs. Ask yourself, what makes you come alive? And go do that. Because what the world needs is people who have come alive." Honoring the place of both of these communities in my life is what makes me come alive. It's what makes me feel whole. The tricky part is figuring out how to honor these communities. When I listened to my genuine, it led me to a life of vocational practice as an ordained priest. So my ordination teacher and I decided to make some changes to the traditional Japanese ordination ceremony in order to reflect some of the cultural elements that were important to me. And I'm wearing one of the most important ones. Usually, during Japanese ordination, the ordinand receives a set of Japanese sitting robes and this piece of black fabric called enokesa. Today, I'm wearing robes that my mother made for me, sitting robes, from fabric that she received from a minister who visited Ghana from our church. It's also traditional for a priest to sew their own okesa and then ask others in their lives to put some stitches in. So this okesa, in addition to my own stitches, includes stitches from people in the Black, Buddhist, and other communities that are meaningful in my life. They are tangible symbols. They are tangible reminders of what makes me act alive, what makes me whole. But I don't have access to this wholeness only in my life as a vocational priest. I can access this anywhere. I'm whole when I'm making homemade applesauce and I remember the friend who taught me how to use a food strainer. I'm whole when I taught myself how to crochet, holding the yarn and moving my hands the way I remembered my mother doing it when I was a child. I feel whole when I'm in present conversation with others. And I feel whole when I put my hands together and I chant the names of ancestors. Howard Thurman speaks of listening to the sound of the genuine in yourself so that you can discover what comes alive for yourself and others, and share that discovery with the world. We do this as embodied persons, looking for authenticity in our own lives while also negotiating external projections. I believe wholeness is a way of life. I also think that this is the essence of wholeness, something constant and fluid that we experience moment to moment and also carry with us as our lives change and we look for opportunities of meaning making. Returning to Thurman's commencement speech, he asked, "What is your name? Who are you? And can you hear the sound of the genuine in yourself?" Reverend Thurman, my name is Sacred Source, True Flourishing. I am a sacred source of the wisdom that flows in my blood and the wisdom of my spiritual practice. May each of you hear the fullness of the sound of your genuine and may it nourish you every day in the activity of your life. Thank you.